Tensions are heating up on Israel's northern border. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah fired rockets at towns in northern Israel, saying it was in retaliation to the Israeli airstrikes that came the night before. Hezbollah says that those missile strikes killed 9 people. The Israeli military said today that it killed the deputy commander of Hezbollah's rocket and missiles unit, Ali Abed Aksan Naim.
Meanwhile, the World Court has ordered Israel to take all necessary and effective action to ensure food supplies get to the Palestinian population to halt a spreading famine. The judges said in the order, quote, "The court observes that Palestinians in Gaza are no longer facing only a risk of famine, but that famine is setting in," end quote. The new measures were requested by South Africa as part of its argument that accuses Israel of genocide. The International Court of Justice also issued an order on Israel. The UN court said Israel must open more land crossings into Gaza for food, water, and other essential supplies. The United Nations reported that 100% of Gaza's 2.3 million people are at severe levels of food insecurity, and the UN Food Agency says 70% of the people remaining in Gaza are experiencing catastrophic hunger. There are reports of people there eating grass. It just makes sense that there are pathways into Gaza to get humanitarian aid to the people that are still there, that are struggling. A lot of these roads, however, have been bombed by Israel intentionally. Their decision to have U.S. aid come in, via ship, it turns out, was so that they could control the food coming into Gaza. Now, to decide to starve the entire population as punishment for what Hamas is doing is also against international laws, even if they don't want to call it genocide by name. There are plenty of other war crimes which definitions fit here. Collective punishment is a war crime, and so there are a lot of things going on that are just terribly wrong here. And the U.S. deciding to abstain in a Security Council vote around a ceasefire between Israel and Palestine, I think, is their first sort of repercussion, Israel's repercussion, rather, for their egregious actions. Obviously, you have Biden saying, we told you to stop doing this. Please avoid civilian casualties. That was never a part of Israel's plan. And finally, the United States is taking some kind of action. Will it bring any relief for the people of Gaza? I'm not too sure of that.
Yeah, it just strikes me as a little backwards that they had to build this pier to bring food in when they control a lot of the purse strings for Israel and could threaten to take aid away unless they are actively providing the necessary food that the Gazans need in order to survive. That's the reason why you give foreign aid, is so that you can have some say over what these other countries do. I mean, yes, humanitarian aid as well, but in this case, we're providing a lot of military aid, so you should be able to leverage that into potentially changing Israel's behavior. Now, Israel, in response to the United States abstaining from that UN vote and declining to veto it, was that Netanyahu said that him and his leaders were not going to come to the United States for a meeting that they had planned coming up in the next month or so. Were you surprised by that, Jessica? And how do you think that this is going to continue to affect that political relationship between the Israeli government and the Biden administration?
I was surprised Netanyahu considered coming to the United States in the first place. Obviously, this is a war that 55% of Americans now don't approve of. They don't approve of Israel's escalation in Gaza and the path that it's going. So I think the fact that Netanyahu considered coming, I think he knew he would be met with protests, that would give more press and more attention to what's been going on in the Gaza Strip. And so I thought it was silly that he considered coming in the first place. Netanyahu is a guy who grew up in the United States, though. He grew up here. He went to private school. He was friends with the Kushner family. He lived a very privileged life just in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The fact that we have so many leaders that have essentially been installed in part by the United States government, by United States support, that grew up in the United States, that the CIA has literally brought over after establishing coups in these countries, putting people into power, or rather creating a vacuum of power, which allows them to take someone living in the United States, attending our schools and universities, and place them into power. This wouldn't be the first time this has happened. Now, the U.S. support of right-wing governments in Israel, I think, is very concerning. Does it suggest that covert operations were at play? I don't even think we need to get to that, because we have deliberate military aid going to Israel. We have the United States government explicitly stating that they support Israel. They'll support Israel's right to defend itself and maintain itself as a state. So the fact that the U.S. is supporting someone like Netanyahu, given our track record, not surprising, but still concerning, because I think a lot of people coming out of the 80s, when we saw a lot of these coups that the U.S. backed, I think we wanted our foreign policy to go in a different direction. I don't think we wanted to see the U.S. government picking sides in the interest of resources, religious affairs, to sell more weapons, whatever the reasons may be. I think people wanted to see the U.S. take a back seat in a lot of international conflicts. And this was a situation where, is Netanyahu representative of the Israeli people? I'm not so sure of that. And it seems that the United States hasn't broken from that trend of supporting people in the name of democracy, in the name of peace, in the name of fighting terrorism, that actually it seems to be doing the exact opposite.
I'm curious to see what exactly the posture is going to be from the former President Donald Trump on this as well, because he was very supportive of Israel when he was in office for his first term. He seemed to have a good relationship with Netanyahu. He, of course, moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem during his tenure and made several visits to the country. But in recent comments, he's been pretty critical of Israel's offensive, saying that he wants them to finish up their offensive into the Gaza region because the world is turning against their campaign. This was for an interview with an Israeli newspaper, by the way. He said, "You have to finish up your war. You have to finish it up. You've got to get it done. We've got to get to peace. You can't have this going on. And I will say, Israel has to be very careful because you are losing a lot of the world. You are losing a lot of support." And it was kind of surprising, again, from someone who was ostensibly incredibly pro-Israel when they were in office for their first term. And so I think even he sees the tea leaves kind of changing. And considering he's been a fairly anti-interventionist candidate and president, he doesn't want the United States to continue to send aid to Ukraine, for example. He had a plan in place to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, wanted to draw troops down in Syria, and now seems to be sort of taking the same approach with Israel, which sort of historically has been the one country that the United States, even when it is has a more anti-interventionist chief, is still willing to kind of support both financially and militarily. That tide seems to be changing. Were you surprised by the former president's comments, Jessica?
Yeah, I think I was, but we always see this kind of trend where when public support goes in the other direction, the president goes in the other direction. A leader should not be someone who represents what is polling well. A leader should be someone who defines a political moment. And the right thing for Joe Biden to do when October 7th happened would be to warn the world that Benjamin Netanyahu is a very right-wing president who doesn't believe that Palestine should exist as a state. Now, there was a prime minister of Israel that supported a two-state solution, the first native-born prime minister of Israel, after attending this kind of rally for a two-state solution to bring about peace in the region. He was assassinated by the right-wing coalition in Israel. So when we look at the history here and the politics within Israel, Joe Biden should have had the tune he has now from the very beginning of U.S.-Israel relations following October 7th. Warning people that it was very likely that this would be a catalyst for an escalation of Benjamin Netanyahu's administration taking land in Palestine and continuing these kind of ground offensives and intensifying the occupation of the territories in the West Bank and in Gaza. And so the fact that Joe Biden just now, when it's becoming very unpopular to support Israel, is criticizing Israel, just feels like a political move that is meeting the moment of public opinion, not meeting the moment politically when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to foreign policy, and when it comes to basic humanity. He knew before anyone else the details of what was going on the ground in Gaza, before the public did. So he should have made up his mind based on the facts of what was happening, not based on the trend of public opinion. It's good that he's changing his opinion, but it does feel too late, but better late than never.
And also from a public statement standpoint, Biden and the White House have continued to express support for Israel. They haven't really changed their tune that much in terms of what statements they're making. And I kind of get the sense that there's this internal split in the White House. And I mean, there's plenty to back this up, right? A lot of staffers apparently protesting the administration's policy on this issue, between the sort of top brass, whether it's President Biden or John Kirby at the State Department and some of the NSC officials. I mean, they've said recently, John Kirby said in response to this UN resolution, that it has no impact at all on Israel and Israel's ability to continue to go after Hamas, and does not represent a change at all in our policy. While President Biden, has said that he has over-the-top support for Israel even at this point. So it seems like there's really just this divide within the White House, even within the Biden administration, among younger staffers, perhaps mid-level staffers, who feel like they're trying to pressure the president to change in response to what his base really wants. And the president, because he has long been so supportive of Israel, has been really resistant to that idea and is sort of trying to strike a balance between the two. And in the process, of course, he's not really making anyone happy. We're going to have to leave it there. We'll be back with more Rising after this.